you need to really remind yourself and jot out. All it takes is a one-page sheet. Just check it off, use it as a reference. I'm guilty of sometimes rushing on the show to get on another, and I just lost that opportunity. It's not about getting on as many shows as possible. It's getting on the right shows. It's speaking with the guest that could reciprocate, right?
What if your most valuable return from a podcast interview isn't listens or leads, but relationships? In this episode of the Podcast Interview Marketing Show, I sit down with franchise expert and relationship builder, Giuseppe Grammatico. And we dig into how being a great guest or a host isn't about doing more interviews, but getting more from every interview. Giuseppe shares how his podcast has opened doors to strategic partnerships, recurring guest spots, a published book, and high-quality referrals, all by focusing on transformational connections rather than transactional downloads or clicks. If you're in the game for the long-term impact, then this episode is for you. We'll talk about the checklist he uses after every show, how he turns post-show chats into business breakthrough, and why he believes that your podcast interview is just the beginning, not the end of the relationship. If you're tired of just chasing more activity and ready to build a brand on trust, relationships, and results, then listen up. This episode is for you. Giuseppe, we've talked about this a lot, and you've seen it as a guest and as a host, but this whole idea that relationships are the ultimate currency, right? So talk to me about how you're seeing relationships built with the host and the guest in podcasts.
Well, Tom, thanks for having me. You were on my show not too long ago, so it's an honor to be on the show. Those relationships are key. We were talking prior to the recording, and we were talking about lead generation and paid ads and all the different ways. And AI, that was a whole topic in and of itself. And, relationships are where it's at. It's the thing that really helps us to stand out. And, being on, I've been a guest on probably about 100 different shows over the last 5 years. Having that relationship with the host makes all the difference. Having that relationship, the follow-up, the go-to person for anyone that is in career transition, I think makes all the difference. And at the end of the day, it's that relationship, that trust is generated, and that's not something that could be faked. And that's something that I truly enjoy. It's not this numbers game where you have to be on 1,000 shows and you have all these quotas, but it's really about, having that relationship and being that go-to expert on that specific topic. So I think that goes a long way, and that's something that's really hard to measure when you compare it to like paid ads, and it's got to be within a certain ad spend and a certain ROI. Those ROIs pay dividends for decades and decades to come.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what you're doing is so relationship based, right? You're helping people find the ideal franchise, find their strengths, what's going to work for them. It's not a product, that's a service. And that's one of those things where they have to trust you, they have to know you, and that's sometimes can be hard to do just off of an ad. And I would say even the same way, the host needs to know what you believe and who you are. So talk about how you build that relationship with the host so that you can build that even with the guests then too.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to get on the show so that the trust is being built. So if they don't feel like it's a good match for whatever reason, you won't be on that show. And hey, I may not be the perfect fit, and vice versa. So that goes a long way. But the trust factor, when you're referring someone to anyone, right, they're looking at, well, what's the cost to them if things don't work out? There was a study done years ago, and people were hesitant to refer just because of that. But that relationship with the host is everything. You build trust. You end up being that go-to person. So that, number one, they're putting you on their show. But secondly, if there's anyone that they come across that is in that career transition, they can refer over to you. So without the trust, they're going to be hesitant. They're putting their reputation obviously on the line. So that goes a long way. So, that trust is a couple things, right? It's having a great conversation, showing up to the recording, having the follow-up, the dialogue, the feedback after the show. I think that plays all together in building that trust and that relationship going forward.
Even how you said getting on the show originally, I just came back from Orlando, down there at Podfest, and Joe Saul-Stihai of Sacking Benjamins had done a presentation where he was talking about the AI slop that he was getting all the time. And he showed a bunch of different emails. It was Dear Joe, Dear Stacking, Dear Benjamins. There was one that said, Dear Joe Saul-Stihai, Stacking Benjamins, Cumulus Media. It's like, you want to talk about breaking trust right there?
Yes.
Um,
That's a quick way to the trash, right? It's and I'm guilty of it as well. So I'm not going to say I'm not guilty. I'm guilty of it as well. And yes, it does take a lot and automate things, but yeah, it can also kill that trust very fast in that one email.
and I think also how you said vouching for you, right? And I never thought about it in that term, right? Before I bring you on a podcast and introduce you to my whole audience here, I want to know that you're legit, right? Um, before I before I introduce a friend and say, you need to work with Giuseppe, right? I want to make sure that that introduction doesn't hurt me, right?
Right.
So it's
Yes.
like it's that old mob thing, if I vouch for somebody, it's my rear end on the line.
Yes, it's kind of you got a guy. I have a guy, and usually, when I look at, and I say this joking, but it's true. It's if I'm going to bring someone on, I'm looking at it. Is this someone? Not only are they going to have a great conversation, but is there that trust, and can I refer them? Because my offer to my audience, because I also, franchise freedom. We talk about gaining access to the host is that anytime you listen to my show, any guests I have had in the past, if you would like a conversation, I will personally stop what I'm doing to make that introduction. So if I am not comfortable making that introduction, you probably won't be a great guest for the show. So I look at it that way. And it's just, these are just intros. I'm looking for a CPA in my area. No problem. We just had a CPA on the show. So that's how I talk about that in the show. And that's why we're super selective in who we bring on.
I love how you build the relationships. It's not just the transaction of you're a guest on a podcast or you have somebody on your podcast and it becomes a numbers game, right? There's those relationships, and kudos to you. I know it's not just by accident. Can you talk about how you intentionally do things to build those relationships and maybe put two hats on? How do you build those relationships as a guest when you go on other people's show? And then like when other people come on your shows, what do you do to keep that relationship, that potential for referrals to keep going?
Yeah, so it goes back to why I got into podcasting, and I launched my show. It's a lot of work. I've been a guest. I've had my own show, and the whole purpose wasn't to generate leads. I mean, yes, that's a byproduct of anything we do, but ultimately it was to network. Little did I know when I launched this show back in January, so 6 years ago, January of 2020, COVID hit. And it really worked in my favor because no one was meeting in person at the time. So it was all these virtual meetings. So instead of grabbing a coffee, let's do a podcast and let's just record our conversation. So going back to your question, being a guest, obviously it's being respectful to the host and audience and staying in line with what was discussed as far as the various topics, but it goes into things such as once the show is produced, it's sharing the episode, it's tagging everyone, it's gaining maximum exposure so that everyone benefits. So that, in the post when I do share, I always say, if you would like an introduction to whatever show was on, let me know. We can make that introduction. So it's not being salesy, it's being authentic. It's really, being able to benefit, because I know it costs a lot to produce an episode as a host. So I want to be respectful, and I also want to, go in with the promise, hey, we talked about sharing. I will share this to all my platforms. I'll even get specific, my monthly newsletter, and these are the platforms I'm on, and this is when I will share it. As a host, we kind of, you reverse it, and we expect our guests, obviously, to when having the show, it's really to have that authentic conversation and being an open resource. If the guest is not open to these introductions, if the guest is not open to the conversations, which I don't know why they wouldn't be, we rule them out. We just won't have the episode, and that's okay. Not every person that reaches out, just like when I reach out to other shows, are good fits. So I think it's just being open and honest up front as to, this is really to learn about a new topic, to have a great conversation, to provide feedback and support, but also to keep the lines of communication open should someone want to reach out or learn a little bit more about, interview marketing, or learn a little bit more about paid ads on Meta, or whatever they're offering. Just having that dialogue and that openness to sharing and keeping those conversations going.
Man, I should clip this and use this as an example, right? Because you explained it better than I did. It's not just about leads, right? I remember somebody
So
saying,
yeah.
I just want more leads. I'm like, that's easy, right? Um,
Right. It
raffle,
truly is.
raffle off a Tesla,
Yeah.
MacBook, whatever it is. And they're like, but that won't get me clients. I'm like, well, what do you want? Clients or leads? Because they're not the same, right? So that you're looking for that impact and trying to optimize for long-term client value there. So that was amazing. And then also this idea of introductions, right? I don't know where I heard this, but somebody said the greatest gift you can ever give someone is introducing them to a new idea, a new person, right? It's the only thing you can't do for yourself, and it can change your life. So you're very upfront and vocal that, hey, I'd love to do that. And you get to start to be seen as the connector, that person that knows everyone, both as a guest when you're on other people's shows and as a host, that you're making all of these connections. And that is super, super valuable.
We try our best, and part of it was the changing of positioning. That's something I'm still working on, but it was I'm your go-to for franchising. Well, no, I'm your go-to for career transition. We talk about business ownership because we do realize that franchising isn't for everyone. We do realize there's a lot of similarities, whether it's a business or franchise, the connections, the CPAs, the attorneys, the funding companies, just to name a few. So, our positioning changed a little bit to say anyone in career transition. If you lost your job, have you thought about entrepreneurship? Use us as a resource. The American dream is live and well, and people get super excited, but they may not have their funding or finances in order. So we can make that introduction to a professional funding company so that maybe we talk in 6 months, but in the meantime, they're getting their finances together. They're figuring out where they need to be. So I think that being a connector is huge because, people don't want to Google, like, what are the best CPAs online. For me, I wouldn't do that. I'm going to go to maybe a recommendation or a referral because they've used them personally, and I can trust that referral source versus an ad I saw online.
Yeah, that's so interesting that I'm not hiring the lawyer that I just saw on the billboard,
Right.
right? If
Yes.
it's my freedom and happiness, I'm getting a referral on there. And I also loved how you talked about that you work with people in career transition, right? And that is so much more powerful because, as we talked about, making introductions, right? I think sometimes people make it hard to do an introduction because if I'm waiting for somebody to say, I'm looking to buy a franchise, right? They're probably further down in the funnel, right? They're already working with somebody or has thought about it, but to catch them in the bigger that, hey, I'm going through a career transition, right? And today that's timely and timeless, right? So what types of things to think about and, to be able to say, hey, I know a guy, you should talk with him. A lot of great options there. Just, check out Franchise Freedom. Happy to introduce you to Giuseppe. I love how that's such a bigger idea that you're trying to build there.
Yeah, and it's kind of to your point. Is someone thinking of buying a franchise? No, they may have head trash. It may be millions of dollars. It may be fast food. may have not have even thought of it. They just may think they're stuck at their job, so they need a new job. So it's really to open them up to say, these are your options. There are jobs, there are startups. I've done all three, and there's franchises. Which is going to be the better fit. It's not my job to sell you. Alex Hormozy talks about this all the time. I have nothing to sell you. All his stuff is free virtually. These are your options. Do they all work? Absolutely. Not everyone should own a business. Not everyone is a fit for a franchise, but these are your options. And then from there, you have a clearer picture. Like, okay, let them decide what direction. And if they want to explore franchising, great. If they want to explore, going maybe in the corporate world, we have connections with people that, especially the larger financial institutions that we can refer them to. So it's not like we're shoving, what you got to do franchising and that's the end all be all. It's not. It's not for everyone. But keep in mind, you may want to explore. There are franchises that you can run semi-passive and keep your job. You don't need to be a millionaire, and kind of thread that in and have those conversations to open them up to different options.
Without talking names or anything, you have shared that you've got to be friends with various podcasters that you've been on their show. They've become referral partners, right? And that just doesn't happen by accident. So, without mentioning names and who all your great referral partners are, can you talk about how that sort of evolved and how you think about doing that going forward to replicate that lightning?
Yeah. So yeah, so I've been, my show 6 years. I've been on other shows as a guest for 8 years roughly, and a lot of them. I had a company that was helping me years ago that launched my podcast, and we just started. We just kicked it off. I was on their show. We kind of we exchanged shows at the time. That's something we were experimenting with back then. But we also it was a conversation after the show where the magic happened. We sat down. And I was very specific. I always put 20 minutes after the show. We're going to book an hour. It's 40-minute episode, 20 minutes afterwards. And in that 20 minutes, we sat down and I said, how can we help one another? Sometimes, believe it or not, instead of saying, well, who can we refer? We were referring our business plans. Like, well, I'm in this business, but I'm looking to shift, or I'm looking to change the way I market myself, the way I'm sorry, not market, I position myself online. And we started having those conversations. And then I said, you know what? You have a lot, there's a lot we can cover. Why don't we break it up? And what I started doing was, after that first episode, what are 3 other topics? And let's do a topic a year. Let's get you back on. And we did this kind of reoccurring aspect. And there's about 5 guests that we have on once a year. And I go, I don't want to talk about the same thing, but let's talk about different aspects. But prior to that, we were essentially analyzing each other's businesses. There was one individual in particular. We're very good friends now. They're in the space of helping with cash flow and really, kind of budgeting your expenses and kind of what all that looks like. So they had helped me personally, and I helped review their business and said, there's so many other topics we can talk about. We need a show for each one. So that's where those relationships were brought up. And then some of them came back and said, we'd like to offer you, is the only franchise expert on the show, if that's okay with you. And they kind of reciprocated and said, let's do it. Let's do an annual show just covering the world of franchising. And that's how they were set up. But this wasn't an overnight thing. This wasn't even necessarily intentional. It kind of just happened after having the conversations and talking about maybe an issue they had with a client, or maybe a marketing solution that wasn't working. And we became friends and built those relationships. And those were all online. I've only met one of them in person. Believe it or not, these have just been conversations, over the show.
Yeah. And what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. So you downplay it, but I think there is so much power in that, because I look at one extreme to the other. The people that say, I want to be on 100 podcasts this month because it'll be massive exposure. Well, see how that works out for you. And they rush from one to another and don't make the most out of every opportunity. And you talked there about taking that extra time afterwards in order to build that relationship. I think one of our clients who was on a national news, and he said he got more value from being in the green room an
Yeah.
hour before and an hour after than he did the 3 minutes on national news. He's like, do you have any idea the people that you meet in the green room at national news? And he's like, get there enough and they become friends. And it's that I think people focus on the efficiency and start to play numbers game as opposed to the effectiveness and making the most of every opportunity.
I love that. It goes back to the intention of the show, why you're doing this. And I think that's where you need to get extremely clear because back in the day in 2019, prior to launching the show, I had a friend of mine who had a podcast for about a year or so. And he's like, have your intention clear. If you're going to launch a show to generate leads, it's not gonna work. That should not be your intention. Maybe it does with a different, maybe combined with a different strategy, but really the whole reason of doing this is the networking. I launched back before video, so someone told me I had a face for radio is the big joke, and then we launched on YouTube and said, all right, well, do we continue with the show or do we scrap it? But all joking aside, it's really what is the intention and getting organized. I had a very detailed script on the show. I'm definitely a little bit more conversational. It's in some cases it almost became like an interrogation, and I definitely wanted to keep the conversation going. But I have a checklist after every show, just making sure I have all the assets. That we have a follow up call afterwards. That I am bringing one or two people to the table, whether it be a prospect, a lead, or a vendor or company that they can work with. So I'm always trying to add value the best I can. And that may be bringing one or two people to the table. So as much as we think we remember all this, you get excited, you press for time, you forget. So you need to make sure to budget accordingly and have this. It's a simple one-page checklist that I use after every episode.
I was going to say, we're going to have to talk and compare checklists on there because I'm sure there's things that you're doing that I haven't thought about and vice versa. But that is so powerful of setting that intention before you go on the interview of what are you trying to get out of this, and knowing that when the recording stops doesn't mean that intention stops too.
Correct. 100%. And that's something that you need to really remind yourself and jot out. All it takes is a one-page sheet. Just check it off, use it as a reference. I'm guilty of sometimes rushing on the show to get on another, and I just lost that opportunity. It's not about getting on as many shows as possible. It's getting on the right shows. It's speaking with the guests that could reciprocate, right? There's a benefit. We can work together. In some cases, I remember one gentleman said, "I want you on the show every year because we talk about franchising. That's not my forte." And they use part of the part of the episode for his general show, and then half is behind a paid wall. I'm part of his what's the word? His not itinerary, but he has a kind of like a syllabus. And I'm the franchising person that talks about anything, and then anyone that has questions can contact me. So he had called me and said, I'm using you. Is that okay for behind a paid wall? I go, absolutely. He's like, you're the franchise person. I have a funding. I have a CPA, and we put that out there, and you guys all helped me build the course. And I said, that's great. I love that we were able to do that just from one episode.
Talk about lifetime value, right? So many people like, what do you get from the podcast? Well, you look at it as like, what do I get over a decade of podcasts? And I love that. It's like, if you do a good job that first time, it opens doors for other ones too.
Yes.
But it doesn't happen by accident.
It does not. It does not. And it's and the podcast, we, believe it or not, we wrote a book back in 2020 as well, and it was based off of 6 episodes, and those episodes were very specific, but we transcribed it, we hired a copywriter, and we wrote a book from the episode. So it was something where maybe they weren't into podcasts, they were more readers, and we're able to send that book out. So there's so much that could be generated. It helps in many ways, and it's evergreen. I get calls from when was my first show? So in 2018, where they saw an episode and that initiated the interest, and they had listened to me for 2 years before reaching out. I love those calls because when they call me, they're like, I read your book, I read the checklist, and this is what I want. Boom, boom, boom. I gave this some thought, and they're so well prepared. It's like those are your dream candidates that we work with. They're ready to go. They're prepared, and they're not coming on those calls saying, I don't know, like what is a franchise? They pretty much have it all mapped out, the area they want to move in. So they're great, and sometimes, unfortunately, it takes 2 years of consumption for them to reach out, but I always say I'm not going anywhere. So reaching out is great, and love to help where we can.
Those kind of leads are so much more fun too,
Yes.
because they're pre-qualified, they're excited. They've listened to lots of episodes, and everyone they had the opportunity to turn you up or turn you off, and everyone they're like, oh no, Giuseppe's the guy for me. So by the time you get there, they're almost selling you on why you should work with them, as opposed to other lead flows there. I always say it's like kissing frogs. I don't have enough time to spend all my day kissing frogs.
That's true. Listen, there's only enough time in a day, and I absolutely agree. They're a pleasure. It's a different, completely different conversation. And what's really cool is if there is a topic where we didn't get enough time to get to, and because they've been so prepared and they want to dive into funding, well, I interviewed our funding partners. If you're not ready to speak with them, we did a whole episode. It's 30 minutes, and no one, and I mean no one, is going to be able to speak better and in more detail on funding than the actual source themselves, the companies we work with. So we'll touch on it and go, this is a follow-up. Do a little homework. We can always do an introduction later. So I do use it as well for education for those that want to dive a little bit deeper, that want to learn about a specific topic.
And I love how you do that. I've seen that where you'll post things on on a LinkedIn post, right? And you'll be talking about financing, and you'll put the link to the interview that you did on financing, and you'll tag the guest. So it's your opportunity to put them in the spotlight again, show you that you're the connection for the transition guy. You know everybody that knows that they should know. And there's that consistency up there, right? I don't know if I saw you in an airport, if I'd recognize you without the same background. It's like it's so consistent. I definitely recognize your voice from all of the podcast interviews there too.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, that's absolutely it. And it's giving people a taste of what to expect, and the not just the education and the information of just the level of support and service that they're going to get, with this relationship. So I'm not the only person that's in the franchise coaching and consulting space. So I always encourage people, pick the person that that resonates with you, and podcasting gives that person the opportunity, in figuring out if that's the person I want to be working with going forward, because it is from a time perspective, we're investing at least an hour a week together on phone calls.
I want to ask you one question, but I guess it's two questions because I'm asking two different people. So the first one I'm asking Giuseppe, the podcast host of Franchise Freedom. What should hosts think about when they're going into a podcast about building those relationships? What would you say to other hosts?
Yeah, just think of ways of connecting the dots. So if it is a service that you're offering, how to promote that guest, so that they are, if it is, for example, someone looking for a business, and that guest specializes in funding, how to really put them on a pedestal. And that's usually done within the first 5 or 10 minutes prior to recording, in the beginning of the episode that you're reviewing this, but going in and saying, how can we leverage your expertise, and who can we connect you to, and being very clear. So it's structured in a way where you have the guests really talk about their background, who they're able to help, who their avatar is. We have a franchise avatar. So who their avatar is, and maybe that's someone with a certain net worth or liquidity, whatever it is, but being very clear there and setting it up. and also stating, after the episode, you don't have to write all this down. We're going to create a blog and show notes with all the links. You don't have to remember so-and-so's name, Giuseppe Grammatico. Good luck spelling that. We're going to put the LinkedIn. We're going to put the website. Enjoy the episode. Sit back, relax. We'll put all that in there. So that eliminates the note taking. I got to pull over in the car if they're listening to on Spotify or iTunes, and getting very clear on what to expect in that episode. We're going to detail it so that you have all the links moving forward. But I think being on the same page with the guest and being that connector, looking for ways that guest can benefit and help your average listener, because obviously if you have your own show, you know who your average listener is. I think that makes all the difference and sets the tone for the rest of the episode.
All right. Now, same question, flip the hats. Giuseppe Grammatico podcast guest. What would you tell to other podcast guests as they're going on podcasts about building that relationship?
So that's where Interview Valet, helps quite a bit. So Interview Valet is going to get you on a show that has that audience, that ideal audience that you want to be speaking with. So prior to speaking, you want to make sure you're getting on the right shows. It's not, as you mentioned, a numbers game. So your company does a great job getting us on shows that are good matches based off of the audience that we want to be speaking with. That's a big part of this. And you want to, and I'm not saying to rule out shows that are brand new, but you want to get on shows with some, engaging audience that have been around, that have passed the, the 10 episodes. I think most shows don't pass 10 episodes. So, you want to get on the right shows and be very clear who the audience is, what service that they're providing, but also getting permission. I think we can add value. Are you okay if I talk about this? Or can I bring up this book that I wrote and mention it? Because you also want to be very respectful of the host and not just start promoting everything. So, and keeping in mind, it's a dialogue. This isn't a sales pitch. So yes, we offer this. This is where we're able to help, but adding some value on that conversation as to anything, things to think about when looking at entrepreneurship or business ownership. So, but it starts with getting on the right show with a company like Interview Valet, getting on the same page, having that pre-call. And sometimes, by the way, when I'm a guest, the host starts recording right away, and I'll tell the host, can we have 5 or 10 minutes to discuss maybe 3 topics, that I thought of, unless they provided those 3 topics. And then can we set aside 5 or 10 minutes after the show? I'm shocked how many hosts don't do that. And it's not a knock. This is something that we can all learn from. And, what are the next steps? I'm notified in many cases by doing a Google search of my live episode where I was never notified by the host, believe it or not. So it's really getting clear, will you be tagging me? When will it go live? I want to be respectful and make sure that I share the episode as well. That goes a long way in setting the tone for the show.
Giuseppe, what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And this was a masterclass in not just doing more interviews, but getting more from your interviews, both as a guest and a host. Thank you so much. And where can people get in touch with you? What's that next step?
Yes. So if you go, we're actually rebuilding the website. It's going live tomorrow, and this works perfectly with the recording. GG, the franchise guide, GUIDE.com. So GG, the franchise guide. We have 270 episodes covering just about any topic out there. You can download our book, Franchise Freedom, which is also the name of the podcast, or book a call. Our services are free, and would love to chat with you to figure out if a franchise may or may not be a good fit. If you're in career transition, want to know your options, our services are free. What's the catch? We're paid by the franchise companies, no difference than a real estate agent. So take advantage of the resources. Everything is on the website. You got one spot for everything, and looking forward to chatting soon.
Thank you, Giuseppe.
Thanks again, Tom. Take care. It was fun.
Be honest. Are you treating your podcast interviews like the finish line or a launch pad? In today's episode, Giuseppe Grammatico reminded us that the real return on investment of podcasting isn't about getting exposure. It's about building authentic, lasting relationships. Whether you're a guest or a host, the magic doesn't stop when the mic turns off. That's where the true connections can start. Giuseppe laid out a clear, repeatable system from pre-show prep to post-show follow-up that turns interviews into introductions and guests or hosts into long-term collaborators. He's living proof that when you add value first, stay organized, and treat every conversation like it matters, well, it does. So here's your next step. Take 5 minutes after your next interview to connect, reflect, and follow up. Make an introduction. Share your episode with purpose. Keep that conversation going, because podcasting isn't about a transaction. It's a trust accelerator. And if you want to be more than just a voice in somebody's earbuds, if you want to become the person they refer, remember and reach out to, well, podcast interviews done the right way is how it starts.